And I just wish for this war to end. I want no one to be hurt anymore. I'd like all the Palestinians to come back to their homes and the residents of the north of Israel to come back to their houses, the residents of the south to come back, and the hostages, 101 people who are still held in the tunnels of Hamas, this terror organization, to be able to come back to us. I'd like all of the families to be able to hug their relatives, the hug that I didn't make with Carmel. And I know that this is what Carmel would have wanted.
Take us back to a year ago when you first heard of the attack and what had happened to several of your family members.
Yeah. So I'm Shay and I'm the cousin of beautiful Carmel Gat, a 40-year-old woman. Carmel was this person that always used to help others. Just on July 2023, she came to her ex-boyfriend who got sick with cancer and helped him and his family through this last way of farewell to this world. This is just who Carmel was. She helped them until he passed away and still remained to help his kids and wife. And then she went to a trip to India and came back just on October 1st because her mother, Kinneret, invited her for the holiday. And on this day, she came visiting Kibbutz Be'eri. It's the kibbutz of my family, where her family was. And at 6:29, the missiles started and the whole family went into the safe room. Carmel and her parents and her sister-in-law, her brother, and her niece, a 3.5-year-old girl. And then the terrorists broke in and they took my family members one after the other. First was Carmel's mother, Kinneret, who was murdered on the road outside her own house. And next was Carmel. She was taken from the path where her mother's body was lying. And this is the last thing that Carmel had seen before she was taken into Gaza. Her mother's body shot, not knowing what had happened to her father, her beloved brother, and her niece. Just afterwards, her brother managed to save his wife and kid, but then they were caught. And her sister-in-law, she took her 3.5-year-old daughter and she passed her to her husband, understanding that he's running faster and he will be able to save her, while she herself was kidnapped as well. So at this time, Carmel was kidnapped, her sister-in-law was kidnapped, and for 50 long days, we didn't know what had happened to either of them until the deal on November, when over 100 people came back alive, and two of them were a brother and a sister, teenagers, who told us that Carmel was alive. They told us that Carmel was their guardian angel in captivity. She was keeping them sane there, and even though the three of them were starved, given only one pita bread a day, and even though they experienced violence there, Carmel was the one that keeping their hopes up to be released. And she was sharing the food with them, and she was giving them yoga practice in captivity to try and help their mental health intact and imagine the day of their release. And after 50 days, the two of them were actually released alive. But Carmel, she was left behind. And this whole year, we were hoping that we'll see her that we will have her back with us. Carmel had this warm hug that we were all waiting for. Her father, who survived, was waiting for, and we were able to hold on to hope because we knew that she was holding on to hope. And even though we started hearing about the horrible conditions in captivity, and a brave woman, came back on this deal, 40 years old, just like Carmel, and told us that she experienced sexual violence in captivity by her captor, and knowing that she'd been through that on October 24th, and Carmel is still there on October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, this whole period of time that, I can't even make you understand the feeling of a family member. Just imagine your daughter or your friend or your cousin being held by terrorists in tunnels, and knowing that she's still held by a terrorist that took her from her family, that murdered her mom, and knowing that she's a beautiful woman held there. And all this time there is a gun pointed at her head. So every moment we spent taking care and trying to make this deal happen to save her life, a deal just like the one that saved the teenagers that were with her. And this is the only thing that we could hold on my mind, that I couldn't take a bite, not thinking about whether she's eating today and what did she had to do in order to get food. And I couldn't go to sleep without thinking who's sleeping next to her. Is she with other hostages? Is there a terrorist right now next to her?
Next to her.
And what is he doing to her?
Yeah, Shay, Carmel didn't make it home. She was found dead along with 5 others in a tunnel in southern Gaza last month. So that horrific experience that you've been through, that she's been through, has had the worst ending for you, a family member who was waiting for Carmel to come home. And on this day and every hour and every minute, I'm sure you think about her all the time. And maybe some of those thoughts extend to other hostages still in captivity, but also to other Israelis suffering, maybe to Palestinians suffering too. And I just wonder, before I let you go, what your thoughts are about the wider conflict, the wider war, and your government's response.
Yes. So you're right. Carmel managed to survive 328 days before she was brutally murdered by her captors. But I know that other hostages are still alive, just like Carmel was, waiting to be released. And Carmel was a person of peace. She studied Arabic in order to be able to communicate with our neighbors, and all our family believes in peace and still wants peace with our neighbors and all of our neighbors around. And I just wish for this war to end. I want no one to be hurt anymore. I'd like all the Palestinians to come back to their homes, and the residents of the north of Israel to come back to their houses, the residents of the south to come back, and the hostages, 101 people who are still held in the tunnels of Hamas, this terror organization, to be able to come back to us. I'd like all of the families to be able to hug their relatives, the hug that I didn't make with Carmel. And I know that this is what Carmel would have wanted.
Shay, thank you so much for speaking to us. Such powerful words, such powerful testimony. And it's really important for us to hear it on a day like today, and indeed on any other day too. Shay Dickmann, thank you for joining
Thank you.
us. Cousin
May
of
peace
Carmel
be upon
Gat, who was taken hostage on October the 7th and later murdered. Let's now go to the present day in terms of what's happening in the wider conflict, and to Lebanon as well this evening. The IDF says that more than 130 rockets have been fired from Lebanon towards Israel today on the anniversary of the attacks. They said the IDF has said this afternoon they'll launch military operations on the Lebanese coast soon. They've warned civilians to stay off beaches south of the Awali River. We've also heard from Keir Starmer today, urging all sides in the Middle East to step back from the brink. Said there's no military solution to unrest in the region. Let's speak now with Louise Callaghan, who is the Times correspondent in Beirut. Louise, good evening to you.
Hi, good evening.
Louise, look, there was a heavy assault from Israel, we know, on southern Lebanon last night, and there's been a response, rockets fired from Lebanon towards Israel today. We are waiting and watching and holding our breath, and I just wonder, for the Lebanese people that you've been speaking to, how they are feeling at the moment as we sit on this knife edge, really, in terms of sort of where this goes next.
People are terrified. In Beirut at the moment, I mean, I'm sitting out on my balcony here, and you can't really hear any of the fighting, but sometimes in the distance, during the nights, you can hear a kind of distant boom. And it's this really bizarre situation where some parts of the city, particularly the southern suburbs around Dahir, then they're being hit really hard by Israeli airstrikes. They're coming in every night, and all night and all day you can hear the drones buzzing above you. Today, I mean, I shut all the doors in the apartment, was playing music really loudly. I think people are doing the same across the city because it's really incessant. And so Lebanese people here in Beirut, I mean, it's a city divided. There's parts of it where you can walk around and it almost feels like normal life, but it's not. There's displaced people everywhere, people who've fled from the suburbs. Unlike in Gaza, people can flee to safer areas. And so lots of people have come from the south, fled northwards, and they've left parts of the city. And there's a kind of there's a fear of there's no one knows what's going to happen next. There's these airstrikes which are going on. They're targeting. The IDF say that they're targeting Hezbollah, and now we're just waiting to see what happens next. It looks like there's going to be a response from Iran towards Israel. Looks like Iran might again fire missiles towards Israel. That's what we're waiting for at the moment. And the fear a year ago on October 7th, when Israel suffered this appalling tragedy in this attack, then it was one country that was being attacked. And now the war has, the great fears have been realized. The war has spread across the region. I think that for months there've been these warnings. Will this war escalate? Yes, it has. Now Israel is invading Lebanon. And it's unclear how far they're going to go. It's unclear how far they're going to push.
It's being described as a war on 7 fronts. Let's just hear from Joe Biden. We've just had a White House press briefing. It's the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre.
President Biden continues to work around the clock to try to reach a ceasefire and hostage release deal that would not only bring the hostages held by Hamas home to their families, but also end the fighting and alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza, many of whom have been living in hellish conditions, and enabled a much-needed surge of humanitarian aid in Gaza.
Look, I mean, bearing that in mind, and that the IDF say that they'll soon expand operations to the Lebanese coast, you've just been telling us, Louise, of rumours that Iran may well fire towards Israel again. That is what you're hearing tonight. We're moving further away from a diplomatic solution to this, despite what Keir Starmer says about there being no military solution. Even on this day, it appears that diplomacy, any talk of a ceasefire, it feels that we're further away from that than ever.
Absolutely, and I should say that the big thing that we've been discussing over the last few days is Israel firing on Iran in response to the big missile attack that
rather
they
than
expected.
Iran going on Israel again.
So yeah, absolutely. So that's what we're expecting now in the next couple of days. And then so I think that as far as from what I understand, that for this whole year, there's basically been negotiations ongoing, lots of them brokered by the US, just about how we're going to stop this, and there's been so many people involved in this. There's been the US and Qatar and Egypt kind of trying to figure out a solution to this, but it hasn't happened. And I think fundamentally now it sort of seems like the parties to the war are further apart than ever. The things that they want seem so irreconcilable. And I hope I'm wrong, but at the moment it looks like a ceasefire or a solution is very far away.
Louise, thank you for joining us in Beirut at the moment. That is Louise Callahan, Times correspondent in Beirut. You can also read Louise's work across thetimes.com and in the paper as well. Thank you, Louise.